Hello and welcome to the Inside the Mind of a Serial Killer session. So this session will take about 45 minutes, give and take. So grab yourself a cup of tea. I've got my lovely mug here, a cup of coffee, hot chocolate, whatever it is that you drink. Feel free to grab yourself pen and paper if you want to take notes. I'm absolutely fine with that. And I will explain at the end how you can get in touch about asking lots of questions. So please do enjoy. Please do the little tasks. It just breaks up a little bit instead of you sat listening to me talking. The aims of the session then is to provide a understanding of what a serial killer is. Now there are lots and lots of misconceptions out there, and I can guarantee that if I was to ask you all individually, what do you define a serial killer as, we'll get lots and lots of different definitions, and a lot of them stem from the media. So we'll narrow, hone in on that a little bit. We'll look at some of the psychological traits and behaviours that are often seen in these types of offenders, and then we'll also have a look at why they may go on to commit these, and a little bit at the end about the legal considerations and what does the legal system do with these types of offenders. So to get us started then, what I'd like you to do is just have a think. You can pause the recording if you want. What do you think serial killers are born, made, or a combination of both? So just make some notes, pause me if you wish, and then as we go through the session you can keep referring back to your notes, and then at the end revisit and see what you come up with after that. Another question that I'd like you to jot down, if you have pen and paper or just think about, is what do you think is the definition of a serial killer? And whilst you are thinking about this, think to yourself, where have you got that definition from? Is it from the media? Is it from friends and family? Is it from university if you've been studying? Just have a think of where you got it from. Okay, so before we get into any definitions or any of the history, whenever anybody is talking about serial killer and serial murder, the first thing that comes to mind is this. So just have a quick think. Does anybody know what this is a picture of? So this is a depiction of the Jack the Ripper murders when he was prevalent in 1888, and he went on to kill 5 prostitutes. Jack the Ripper is still unknown. People don't know who he was. He was dubbed Jack the Ripper by the media, and this was the first time that serial killing came to the forefront of society, when it started to be recognised. So whenever we're talking about serial murder, it's always important that we do acknowledge those events. There are lots of theories knocking around as to who Jack the Ripper was. Was he a butcher? Was he a surgeon? Was he a vagrant? And still to this day it's unknown, but it's still a fascinating series of events to look into if that is something that you are interested in. Then fast forward many years in the future, and it brings us to this organisation here, the FBI, and this was where serial killing became formalised, if you like, and this is the centre of serial killing studies, law enforcement practices. So 1972, some FBI agents wanted to establish, why do people commit violent crime? What are the common traits amongst violent offenders? So what they did is they conducted a study into looking at serial killers specifically. They interviewed them and they looked at their traits, their crime scene behaviours, their past, and devised this, the Crime Classification Manual. And in this manual, it's a law enforcement book that is used widely in the US, and it classifies different types of crimes. So it talks about personal cause homicide, sexual homicide, medical homicide, rape and sexual assault, arson and bombing, and this is just supports law enforcement with their investigation. So that came out of this study here, and it's more commonly known the Behavioural Analysis Unit. It's a very small unit, but it was influential in the work of serial killers, and a lot of what we know today comes from those agents who, a lot of them are still working today. A lot of them are working within universities, and research is constantly being updated and looked at, but this is the starting point, if you like. So on the back of that then, let's have a look at a definition. So the definition of serial murder is the unlawful killing of 2 or more victims by the same offenders in separate events. And this is a definition set by the FBI. Recently, there was a symposium in, I think it was Quantico, where lots of people came together, experts, agents, academics, and looked at this definition. So you may have heard either the definition of being 3 or more victims, you may have heard of the cooling off period, but the FBI have kind of settled on this definition here, and they've kind of removed the cooling off period, which was a little surprise, because if we look at this definition from a critical standpoint, the unlawful killing of 2 or more victims by the same offender in separate events. What does this term separate events mean? Just so that's something to kind of think about with critical lens. So, for example, if somebody was to break into a house and kill 3 members of their family, that would not make them a serial murderer because it's not in separate events. However, if somebody broke into somebody's house and killed the mum, and then a couple of weeks later broke into another house and killed somebody else, and so that would be an example of serial murder because it's all about those separate events. So some of the definitions are a bit ambiguous, but there are also some other terms that I'd like to draw your attention to as well, which can be used interchangeably sometimes just due to the way that the media portray them. So mass is defined as the killing of 3 or more people at one time in one location. So that would be your shootings in schools in the US. That's why they refer to as mass shootings. Or that would be if somebody did come into a house and kill all of the family, that would be a mass murder. Now, spree murder is a term that's not used that much anymore. It's almost phasing out, if you wish. And that is multiple murders in the same attack but in different locations. And what comes to mind when we talk about spree killings is the Derek Bird shootings. So it may be somebody is going on a rampage, if you like, so it's the same attack but are travelling and committing the offence in different locations. But you can start to see how the definitions all start to mingle into one and how they can be easily misconstrued. So we've got the definitions, so we're starting to understand that a little bit more. Now let's delve into the why. So there is no one definition as to why people do go on to commit these sorts of crimes. However, there is an awful lot of research out there that says it's a process. So somebody doesn't just wake up one day and think, I'm going to go out and commit serial murder. It's normally a process of events that may happen in childhood, may happen in your adolescence, which can lead into killing in adulthood, because the average age that somebody does start killing is 28. Where that's come from, I don't know, but then that just gives us a bit of information as to there is a lot that goes on to lead somebody to do this. Something that comes up quite a lot is trauma and head injuries. So Fred West was known to have known to have banged his head as a child when he fell off a swing, and friends and family say that he was never the same again. Was that one of the causes that led him to do what he did? We don't know, it's just a theory. Neglect and abuse is something that crops up quite a lot, and that is something that we'll look into when we look at some case studies throughout. So this build-up of neglect and abuse in their childhood, how does that impact somebody as an adult, which is a completely different session on its own, but it is really fascinating to look at. Mental health as well, the media like that one. For example, psychopathy, so your psychopath, oh goodness, he must be a psychopath because he's killed 12 people. Absolutely not true. Again, it's a word that's thrown about with very little meaning in terms of the media. As you can see, a lot of the misconceptions does stem from the media, so I will keep referring to that. So yeah, mental health, and then personal motivation. Some people may like the power control, may be sexually deviant, so they may have fantasies that they want to live out, and the way that they can live them out is by committing these sorts of crimes. And then lastly is the McDonald or the homicide triad, which we will refer back to shortly. And that's the idea that those who wet the bed at ages that you wouldn't necessarily expect, who commit cruelty to animals, and who enjoy setting fires, are all sort of warning signs to progression into murdering human beings. But we'll touch on that when it comes to it. I've popped this diagram together that I like because I think it kind of shows that it's almost a bit of a journey. It's a strange thing to say, and all of these factors are potentially reasons as to why people do go on to commit serial murder, but they're not necessarily on their own. So there are lots and lots of theories out there about birthing. You may have heard of the warrior gene, so having an extra chromosome which makes you angry. Again, there is research out there that supports it, but then equally there's research out there that doesn't support it. We've then got attachment issues. So those of you who have studied this before might be familiar with Bowlby's attachment theory. If not, I would definitely look into it. It's really fascinating about the attachments that children need to form with the primary caregiver. We've then got trauma and abuse, deviant behaviour, so adopting these sexual fantasies. We've got some might be subjected to a traumatising event. Those of you who may be familiar with Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, was subjected to a lot of violent videos from his cousin who fought in the Vietnam War. Was that a contributor? There is theories to say yes, there's theories to say no. So all of these, they won't happen in this order, but they are all factors that research does tell us could be contributing factors. But then, on the other hand, there are lots of people who have attachment issues, that go through trauma and abuse, that go through substance abuse. However, the majority will not go on to commit these sorts of crimes. Mental health disorders is a big one, and the three most common types of mental health disorders associated with serial homicide offenders are schizophrenia, antisocial personality disorder, and psychopathy. So before we look at those disorders separately, just want to introduce you to how they are diagnosed. So the DSM-5 is the American diagnostic tool, and it will have hundreds and hundreds of different mental disorders in there, and then it will have the symptoms and traits. And what will happen is somebody will describe their traits to a psychiatrist, and then he or she will have a look at the traits and kind of refer them to your traits and your symptoms, and then make a decision based on that. The ICD-11 now we are on is the World Health Organization one, which is used here in the UK. So you can start to see some of the criticisms of diagnosing mental health disorders, and you will see that when we delve into these three in a little bit more detail, the crossovers between these types of disorders. So if we start with schizophrenia on here, then I've just got some case studies to just kind of support what we're talking about. So here we have Ed Gain. Let me start by giving you a definition of schizophrenia actually. So schizophrenia is a type of psychosis, and the person who is suffering from it often suffers hallucinations, delusions. You may find that the sufferer is starting to pull away from people, starting to isolate themselves, not want to socialise. They may start to neglect their physical appearance. They are disconnected from their emotions and struggle to distinguish between reality and fiction. And there are 3 cases here where the suspect is said to have been suffering from schizophrenia. There are lots and lots of people in the world that do have this illness and go on to live normal lives. It is treatable by medication, by psychotic medication, but obviously it comes to the forefront when somebody has committed some heinous crimes and the media get hold of it. So David Berkowitz here, who is also known as the Son of Sam, he committed 6 murders in New York between 1976 and 1977, and he believed that it was a dog that was telling him to commit those murders. So you can start to see how the hallucination and delusions have led him to do what he did, and he still sits in prison to this day in New York. We then have Ed Gein here, who was the inspiration for the main character in Psycho and Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and he is suspected to have committed 10 murders, but also many, many more. So the number we're not quite sure on that. Then we have Peter Sutcliffe here, who was local to me, who I'm here in Nottingham, but he was also known as the Yorkshire Ripper, and he went on to kill 13 prostitutes between 75 and 80, and he believed that he was ridding the world of prostitutes, so cleaning the streets. So again, we can start to see the delusions and hallucinations are starting to play a part there. Moving on then to antisocial personality disorder. So this is a disorder or illness that is quite common amongst offenders in general, not necessarily serial killers. And some of the symptoms here are repeatedly breaking the law, difficulty in sustaining long-term relationships, lacking guilt, blaming others, behaving irresponsibly, lacking concern, lacking remorse, being manipulative. And when we look at psychopathy, you will see some links between the 2 illnesses here. So if we look here then at Jeffrey Dahmer, so he murdered 17 men between 78 and 1991, and there is quite a lot of history there of childhood trauma. Then we have Richard Ramirez that I've touched on, who was known as the Night Stalker, and he committed 14 murders between 84 and 85 in California. Moving on to psychopathy then. So psychopaths. So psychopathy is a mental health disorder, and around 1% of the population do have a psychopathy diagnosis, but you will find that the big CEOs of companies have psychopathic traits, and that is how they are able to operate and lead these corporate organizations. Some of the traits that are prominent in those with psychopathy are things like manipulation, they're impulsive, they're arrogant, lack of remorse, feelings of grandiose. They can be quite narcissistic, think very highly of themselves. They are often very intelligent human beings as well, which I suppose makes it a little bit easier for the manipulation side of things. And here we have Ted Bundy, who is very famous, lots of shows on him, who confessed to over 30 murders between in the 1970s, and it's quite interesting that he confessed to 30 murders. We know that he is a psychopath, so it kind of makes you think, well, did he commit 30 murders, or is he bigging himself up, making himself feel much better by saying, well, I've killed 30 people to try and be the best at what he did? So that's interesting. Whenever talking about psychopathy, I like to bring your attention to Diane Downs as well. Not a serial killer, but a very good example of a female with psychopathic traits. So Diane Downs, what she did is she attempted to murder 3 children, and it is believed that she tried to murder them because her boyfriend at the time didn't like children, and then she thought that if she gets rid of the children, her boyfriend will love her more. So she took her 3 children in a car and she faked an attack and a robbery, basically, and shot all 3 children. Unfortunately, 1 passed away, 2 survived, thankfully. And she said she made it look like that someone had tried to rob and kidnap the children, and she also injured herself in the process as well. So again, referring back to those traits that I've just described, it's a very interesting case as to how these illnesses and disorders can distort one's mind. So moving on from mental health then, I want to bring your attention to some of the typologies. So there are lots of typologies out there, and what we find is people fit into a lot of different typologies. So they don't just fit into one category, they have elements of all. So the first one is a visionary type killer, who they hear voices or see visions telling them to do something. So for your visionary, I suppose this can be your satanic killers as well, so those who believe the devil are telling them to do it. The most obvious visionary killer that I'm aware of is David Berkowitz, because obviously he believed the dog was telling him to commit the murders. We then have mission orientated. This is your Peter Sutcliffe. So he wanted to rid the world of prostitutes. He thought they were dirty and he thought he was doing the right thing, so that was his mission. We then got hedonistic, so simply kill because it's fun, because they enjoy it. And that is an example of that type of killer is Edmund Kemper, who was part of the original behavioural analysis study that the FBI conducted when they were looking all into serial killers. And then power and control, so they get pleasure from controlling a victim, and this again could be your Ed Kemper or your Dennis Rader, so your BTK killer, so your bind, torture and kill. And you can see already through the nickname bind, torture and kill how he would have gained control from that. Referring back to the homicide triad or the McDonald triad, so you can see here you've got your fire setting, you've got your animal torture or killing, and then you've got your bedwetting, and kind of it creates this picture of, I guess, warning signs, if you like, of some of these symptoms that you may see in childhood that could potentially lead to those going on to commit serial murder. But again, lots and lots of people, lots and lots of children will continue to bedwet for whatever reason when they're a little bit older. Some children may gain a fascination in fire setting for whatever reason, and some children may find a passion for animal torture or killing, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are going to go on to commit serial murder. Because if we refer back to the slide with the arrows and the circles, it's more of a journey. There's lots and lots to it. So Berkowitz, David Berkowitz, the son of Sam, had a history of animal cruelty and bedwetting. Jeffrey Dahmer had a history of animal cruelty. Ed Kemper had a history of cruelty to animals. Richard Ramirez had a history of animal cruelty and bedwetting as well. And the kind of theory behind the animal cruelty is they seek pleasure from torturing animals, having power over the animals, and then that doesn't quite do it anymore for them, so then that's when they take that next step into torturing and killing humans. So sticking with typologies, Hazelwood and Douglas from the original FBI study, who are still writing books to this day, John Douglas and Ron Hazelwood, fascinating people to look at if you are interested in this sort of stuff, devised some organised and disorganised typologies. And they said that offenders, serial killers, are either display organised or disorganised traits. And this is all explained in here as well. But obviously this has been updated since it was originally published. So characteristics of disorganised offenders then, so they have unskilled worker jobs, they're nocturnal, they have poor hygiene, they usually do not have girlfriends or boyfriends, they live or work near the crime scene, and that's normally because they're quite impulsive, and they normally live alone. They're quite anxious during the crime. They were subjected to harsh discipline in childhood. In terms of what they do after they've committed the crime, so they may change jobs, so they can't hold down a stable job. They may attend the victim's funeral or burial. That's another sign of control. They may return to the crime scene. Then if we look on the other side of it, so those who are described as being organised with what they do, they are likely to be highly intelligent. They're likely to live a double life, if you like. So they're likely to have a family, have a normal job. Nobody suspects that they're committing these sorts of things. They may be charming. They may be able to control their moods. They may live with a partner. They may follow the media. That's still an element of control, so they know where they're at, so they can keep one step ahead. They are likely to embed themselves into the investigation. They might ask what they can do to help. They may, if somebody's missing, they may be one of those people that goes out searching for them, and we see that an awful lot. But as you can see, when we do talk about the case studies, some of those people who have committed these types of offences may fit into both. So that is definitely something to bear in mind. So they also take this organised, disorganised notion to crime scenes as well. And a organised killer, again, this can be found in this book here. You can just buy this book. I bought it just so I could have a look. It is fascinating to have a look through. It's not a read from page to page, it's more dip in and out type book. So your organised killer is aggressive. They'll normally take the body away. They'll normally take the weapon and little evidence is left, so they're quite forensically aware. They may personalise the victim, so they might think that they look like somebody in their past who has done them wrong. They are likely to plan the offences. They're likely to be quite submissive, quite controlling, and their crime scene is likely to be quite tidy in comparison to those crime scenes that are disorganised. So disorganised crime scene, it's likely to be spontaneous. So they may see somebody who resembles somebody from their past walking down the street and think, okay, this is what I'm going to do. They might be controlled by their sexual fantasies. So that may lead them to go and be spontaneous if they see somebody that fits that fantasy. They are not really forensically aware. They are likely to display a chaotic crime scene. Now on the next slide, I have got some AI generated crime scenes that show this. So they're not real, it is AI, but I just wanted to use them as a graphic just to show what these two crime scenes may look like. So if you do not want to look, I will shout up when I've got rid of them, but like I said, it's just computer generated. So here we can see this is what an organised crime scene would look like. So whilst the body is still there, you can see that there's no evidence of a weapon. Whilst you've got the blood here, there's not lots of opportunities for forensics as such. It's quite tidy. You can tell it's quite controlled. The person's got control over it, compared to the other one that is complete chaos. So this shows it was an opportunistic opportunity potentially. It was very chaotic. There's weapons. It's just, you can just tell it is in complete and utter disarray. So from these pictures alone, it can tell, whilst they are fictitious, it can tell a lot about the offender as such. Okay, so moving on from those photographs then, I would like you just to stop and think and have a think, and you can note it down if you wish. So which motivation do you think is the most common or powerful for serial killers, and why? And that is referring back to that could be referring back to the typology, so your hedonistic, your visionary, your power controls, your mission orientated, or it could simply be anything to do with mental health, childhood trauma. So just have a think, so just have a break from listening to me and just jot down anything that you would like to jot down. So kind of bringing everything together that we've looked at, I wanted to do a case study deep dive. So apologies, there is a lot of writing, but I just think it's important so we can delve into it a little bit and apply what we've learnt or what we've been looking at. So we're going to delve into a case study of Ted Bundy, and I'm going to look just a tiny bit into his history, his crime scene activities, his offence behaviour, and apply that to what we've looked at. So Bundy is one of the most infamous serial killers in the US. He's known for his intelligence and his charm, his good looks, and those were used to his advantage during his offending behaviour, his offending time. So we're going to look into the case that looks into his background a little bit, looked into, like I said, some of his crime scene characteristics, how he operated, and what happened post arrest as well, because that is quite unique as well. That's something that you don't see very often. So he was born in the US, raised by his grandparents, and he believed that his mother was his sister, and this could have contributed to some complexities in his psychological makeup. So referring back to the first couple of slides when we talked about trauma, is that an example of the trauma that he may experience? Quite possibly. His early life was marked by confusion about his family life, and this could have affected his relationships in the future and how he felt about himself as well. So again, we start to kind of build that picture that it's not just an overnight decision that these kind of people make. He is very well known for his intelligence, how articulate he was. He was able to blend into society like a normal person. He was studying at university. He was very intelligent. He studied psychology, and I believe he wanted to pursue a career in law enforcement. But even though he came across as in control, there was a lot going on deep inside of him that he kind of had this harboured, deep-seated anger, and he wanted and needed to control others. So his MO, or modus operandi, then was he targeted young women who were often uni students. His first known attacks was in a sorority house where he murdered quite a few young ladies in those. It is believed that his victims looked like his ex-girlfriend who had caused him heartache in the past. They are believed to have long hair parted in the middle, which a lot of young girls have. So again, only he knows the truth behind this. But this does suggest that he had a specific type, and he may have been acting out because he felt displaced. He didn't feel belonged. So if he'd not had that feeling of belonging in his childhood, then that progressed into adolescence and adulthood. That could have been another contributing factor to his actions. He was very clever in what he did. He would often pretend to be injured, or he'd often pretend to have a disability to lure his victims to gain their trust. He would sometimes pose as an authority figure or a police officer, again to gain their trust. And then once he lured them in, that's when he could commit his acts. So he often had two crime scenes. So he would approach people in public places. So this is where this intelligence comes in. He was a high-functioning psychopath. So very intelligent. He knew that if he attacked in parks, beaches, and college campuses, uni college campuses, that he'd be found a lot easier. So that's why he tended to lure them away to a more secluded area where he could commit his offence but have less of a chance of being caught. So he was aware of what he needed to do, and he was quite forensically aware in that sense as well. He would physically overpower them. And again, there was mention of him needing to control in his childhood, in his past. He would often use blunt force trauma as well to knock them unconscious again. That control, putting the fear into them, him having that control over the fear that he was inflicting. And then he would also go on to sexually assault some of them as well. He engaged in necrophilia, which is sexual intercourse with a corpse. And then he's also known to have decapitated some of his victims as well. Again, this idea of control, of having to control his victims. So crime scene behaviour wise then, he was forensically aware. He knew that if, as said previously, that if he attacked in the public arena, he's likely to be caught. So he knew that he had to take them somewhere else. Again, he's got control over what he does. Yeah, so he'll transport them to different locations, making it harder for law enforcement. So they have not only the crime scene whereby the murder happened, you've also got the crime scene where the body was located. So that's two lots of crime scene that law enforcement have got to process and go through. There were signs of a struggle at the abduction site, but the victims did resist. Bundy's ability to physically overpower them meant that the struggle didn't last very long. He would often dispose of the bodies in a similar manner, and he would often leave them in woods and remote areas again. Decomposition starts setting in. It's harder to be detected than if you just left them in a local park, for instance. So that was just a deep dive into a case. So feel free to pause it, make your own notes, and reflect upon what we've discussed. Reflect upon perhaps some of the motivations, some of the crime scene behaviours. Do you think he was organised, an organised offender, a disorganised offender? Do you think he fits into both? So just have a look at that as well, and feel free to pause the recording. There is a video here that I'm not going to show you live, but I'm happy to ping it over to you, where you can have a look at an interview with Ted Bundy, and you can kind of see the narcissism, if you like, coming out. So as we start to wrap up the session together then, something important to acknowledge is the legal considerations. So how do law enforcement deal with these sorts of cases? So we know that the majority of serial murders happen in the US. However, they do happen and have happened in the UK. We talk about profiling here. So that is the ability to go to a crime scene, note down what you see. Is it in disarray? Is it chaotic? Does it look controlled? Where have they killed? And that then law enforcement start to build up a profile of the offender. Now this is something that doesn't happen in the UK. However, it is very popular in the US. So if you've seen shows, for example, like Criminal Minds, that's profiling, and I am going to do a full session on that as well. In the UK, experts will visit crime scenes and will be able to put forward their theories, but however, we don't use the word profiling. But if you are interested in that, please feel free to come along to that sessions where we'll talk about why we don't use the art of profiling in the UK. Linkage analysis as well. So you're looking at murder cases, you're looking at those with similar MOs, you're looking at those with perhaps similar causes of death. Are they linked? How do we know they're linked? It's likely that those who are committing serial murder will not stay in one place. So if we're talking about the US, it's not uncommon for them to go across state lines. So it's making sure that agencies do work together to make sure that those cases are being linked and that things are not being missed. You've then got forensic evidence, which happens in all sorts of crimes. So that's your DNA, your fingerprints, your blood spatter, digital evidence. So that will be assessed as well. And again, these two kind of interlink, because if you've got DNA evidence at one scene that matches another scene, then that's instantly going to be a bit of a bleeper going off, thinking, okay, why is this person's DNA here and here? Task forces is a big thing as well, particularly with the Peter Sutcliffe murders. Task forces were set up where it has hundreds of officers in one task force, all working to try and solve these crimes. You then have the arrest of the offender and the confessions. The Americans like a good confession. And then your competency to stand trial as well. So are you legally sane enough to be able to stand trial? Do you understand what you did what was wrong? Do you understand what you did was not normal? So that's what we mean by competency to stand trial. If not, you won't be able to stand trial. You're likely to go to a secure hospital to support that side of things. If you are deemed as legally sane, then you will stand trial, and it will be up to the prosecution to bring the case forward as to why they think that you're guilty. So that concludes the official session. Thank you very much for showing an interest and signing up. If we were live, I was going to do a Q&A session, but what I will do is I will ping my email address somewhere, and any questions you have, please feel free to email me, and that's absolutely fine, and I'll get back to you the best I can. If I don't know the answer then and now, I will certainly go away and find out for you, because this is just not even touching the surface. There's so much more that we could delve into it, so I'm happy to do that for you as well. Feedback obviously is a gift. Please do give feedback. I will be sending out a Google form link as well, so please do complete that for me. That's a massive help, and that just informs how I do future sessions. So just please be honest on that, because that's what will help me. Last but not least from me then, future snapshot sessions have been planned, if you like, and we're going to look at criminal profiling. So as we said before, the idea of somebody being able to turn up to a scene and say, okay, I believe this offender is a male, living with mum and dad, unemployed, and so on. And we're going to look at that in November, so please look out for that one. Then before Christmas, we'll look at the psychology of criminal behaviour. So that will be psychology of criminal behaviour as a whole, not just violent crimes. Then want to delve into forensic science then, so how science solves crimes, looking at DNA, fingerprints, gunshot residue, familiar DNA as well. So that's one to look out for. And then prison, is it worth it as well? So I believe I've planned that one as a 90-minute session, and that will tie up this section of sessions, if you like. So please do come along to those. Those 4 will be live, and I'm going to set up a Zoom link that will allow me to record as we go along as well. So I really hope to see you there. I'm also looking at planning a murder mystery as well. Murder mystery ladies on, not ladies even, that's the right word, an evening, a murder mystery evening online where we can all come together and we can work through one of those to kind of round off the year, if you want. So please look out for that. So thank you very, very much for joining me. I really hope that you found this informative. I really hope that it's got you intrigued, and I really hope that you will join me for more sessions. So as I said, please do complete the feedback form. That will really, really help me. That will help me within my next steps. And please do keep your eyes out for any new sessions that are coming up, particularly the profiling one and the murder mystery as well, which is in the works. So thank you, and I look forward to hearing your feedback and receiving your questions.